Hey everyone! So over the past couple weeks, we've been learning how to describe sounds, organize our descriptions through game notes and sound maps, and today we're going to learn some new concepts to classify those sounds and get started with our discussion of structure and function. A lot of this video is based on the work of Casey Collins, specifically Chapter 7 of her book Game Sound from 2008, titled Gameplay, Genre, and the Functions of Game Audio. So structure and function are two interrelated concepts that often overlap and intermingle in discussion. To me, I feel funny discussing one without discussing the other in the context of video game music, so you'll probably have noticed that when I'm talking about creating the sound map. They do ask different questions. Structure, I think in a nutshell, boils down to the question of how is this sound or this music organized? What is the form? When does it happen? And discussion of function really gets to why. Why is this sound here? And what is this sound doing? To talk about this more and get started, we're going to go back to one of the games that we've talked about a little bit so far, Mario Bros. 2. So here's Mario Bros. 2. Okay, so Mario Bros. 2, this is the overworld music. If you're in Cirrus Retro, it's titled Enjoying the Land, which is kind of fun, and I never knew that. So to start talking about structure, it starts with this downward riff. And you only hear it the once. It's actually a variation of the title theme. Same notes, same direction, different timing. So as you continue, you're only going to hear this riff once when you enter this area. If I were to just sit in this area, I would never hear that riff again. I would just immediately go to that beginning melody that happens immediately after the downward riff. But you do hear it a lot because you die, and you also do things like enter subspace. So we'll see that now. He goes in, grabs some stuff. And there's the riff again. Focusing on this riff, let's talk about function. So what exactly is this doing? I think it's also just a very distinctive riff from the get-go. I associate that very heavily with this game, so if I hear anything like it, I immediately think of Super Mario Bros. 2. But aside from that, the riff and this music in general really projects like happiness. You're outside under this clear blue sky. It has a very introductory quality to it, and I think it creates a sense of excitement, maybe even optimism. And that's all very subjective and messy and kind of my opinion, and that's totally fine. I think discussing function is really where you can get creative and express what you think. So we're going to talk about a concept called diegesis before we talk about Collins's work in earnest. And this concept is discussed in film music often. So that's TV, movies, things that are not games. In short, if the sound, whether it's music or other sounds, is something that the character in the story can hear, it's diegetic. And if the character cannot hear it, like most film scores, it is non-diegetic. This classification works well in film and TV, but with games, it is not usually the whole story because in games, the music changes depending on the actions of the player. Music can start and end depending on how long someone spends in a level. Characters can trigger new sound or music through their actions depending on the complexity of the game. And there's just a ton of player action noises that also create a lot of different types of sound. So this added layer requires further qualifications, and this is where Collins adds to this diegetic, non-diegetic model. She creates the category of dynamic and non-dynamic. And yes, I know music can also be soft and loud, and that is described as dynamic. And I know it's confusing, but this book is really good and we're going to roll with it. And I think it is possible in our writing to be clear about what we are talking about. So we are going to deal with it together. If a sound does not change with the gameplay, it is non-dynamic. Examples of this include background music and cutscenes, which would count as non-diegetic, or if a NPC is playing music that the player doesn't have any control over, that's diegetic. So in short, if the sound does not change for any reason, it is non-dynamic. For dynamic sound, this is when the sound does change with the gameplay, and it can change due to two different things. The first way that dynamic sound can be is dynamic adaptive. And adaptive audio changes not with the player's action, but with things out of the player's control, like the time of day, either in real life or in the game. Animal Crossing's music is an example of this. So that is dynamic adaptive music. The other category is dynamic interactive music. Dynamic interactive music depends on the player's action. So if the player can control their character and influence the sound, it is dynamic interactive music. All of these categories, non-dynamic, dynamic adaptive, dynamic interactive, they can all also be diegetic or non-diegetic. I swear it's useful. Let's check out adaptive and interactive audio in Breath of the Wild and start seeing what the difference is. So one example of dynamic adaptive audio is when music changes depending on the time of day. The Kakariko Village music in Breath of the Wild is different depending on if you are there at night or if you are there during the day. So we'll listen to the daytime music first. So it's very relaxing, this music. There's some drum and percussion music. There's what sounds like a koto and also maybe a shamisen and a shakuhachi flute. The shakuhachi flute mostly carries the melody. Overall, a very mellow, not high energy piece of music. And this is an example, because it's background music, of non-diegetic sound. So if we go later in this track, this video, by the way, is from the Gamescapes channel. And as far as I can tell, this channel basically has this fixed viewpoint of the village, and you kind of see the characters walking around, and the music plays back along with all of the other things, all of the environmental sound effects and stuff like that. So the night theme. There's a lot more wind sound, a lot of night animal sounds. That's not background music, but that is an example of adaptive diegetic music, in that sounds are heard by the player and they happen at night. The music is a little lower in pitch. There's no percussion as far as I can tell, and the tempo, the speed of the beat, is a little bit slower. So that's an example of dynamic adaptive audio. For dynamic interactive audio, we're going to go to our big playthrough no commentary video, kind of early on. Link is at the Great Plateau. And this is an example of interactive audio that the music is triggered as the enemy is approached. So Link's walking, there's footsteps, which are also dynamic, interactive sound. There's cricket noises, there are cricket noises, but no music yet. Oh, and there's the marimba. So the enemy music has started as he engages and is close to them. So sometimes it won't engage if you mess with the enemy from far away. So if he threw that bomb and ran away, it probably wouldn't have triggered the sound. And as soon as they're defeated, the music kind of fades away. In the sound map example, he is in battle for longer and the music actually develops and gets louder and more present in the texture, but this is an example of a very fleeting moment of combat. Now we've talked about diegetic and non-diegetic music and audio. We've also talked about dynamic and non-dynamic music and audio, and we have talked about, within dynamic audio, adaptive and interactive music. So that creates 6 categories, which are on this table, and we'll just talk through them. So non-dynamic, non-diegetic music is music that never changes and is not something that the character can hear. So examples of this are background music in a cutscene. That's not something that you can ever change. You just got to sit through it. Menu music, player can't hear it. You can't change it. Non-dynamic diegetic music is something that the player can hear, but you still don't have control over. So an example of this might be if an NPC that you cannot interact with is playing music or making sound. Additionally, I think if the character can hear music in a cutscene, that would count as non-dynamic diegetic music. Going into dynamic music, adaptive dynamic music, again, this means that the music does change, but it isn't due to an action of the player. It's due to things out of the player's control, like time. We just saw that in the Kakariko Village theme. And additionally, you'll remember in the discussion of Animal Crossing, that music does change with the hours of the day and sometimes also the weather. Those are also excellent examples of dynamic, adaptive, non-diegetic music. An example of adaptive diegetic music would include sound effects that happen in relation to time. So examples of this in Breath of the Wild include the cricket and critters sounds that happen at night. Those are examples of adaptive diegetic sounds. Interactive sound that is non-diegetic is also background music, but background music that happens when you're in a particular situation. So you saw an example of this through the enemy battle music when Link approaches the bokoblins. And then diegetic interactive music includes actually a lot of sounds, like all of the player sounds, like sword swishing, jumping, footsteps, any vocalizing that might happen due to gameplay. That's all interactive diegetic music. So that's a really big category. Collins also adds one further category, the kinetic gestural category, which has to do with sound created when you are using motion controls. So this is a very specific thing that might not always apply. You can usually find the 6 I just said in a game like Breath of the Wild at some point, but if there are no motion controls, you won't necessarily find them. Some of the examples mentioned in the text are pretty interesting, so I wanted to check them out. Donkey Konga, for example. This is a game where your controller is a pair of Congo drums, and I found someone who played through all of it, which is fabulous. It looks like a fun game. I really want to play it. And I have a hard time really even discerning if this is diegetic or non-diegetic. Like, I would assume that you're controlling Donkey Kong, and Donkey Kong hopefully can hear this music, but who knows? And another example of kinetic gestural sound includes this motion control shrine. Diegetic for sure, because Link is operating this in the game. It's sort of faint, the sound, but you can hear the balls kind of moving around in the actual game. And you are basically using the motion detector in the controller to move this platform around to try and roll the balls into the slots. Apparently, a lot of complaints on YouTube about this game. I remember playing this and not thinking it was a big deal and that it was kind of fun, but a lot of people don't like this level. So we're going to go ahead and practice with one last example. And in this, I'm going to just play the video, pause, name the sound, page through this way. So very informal verbal game notes starting at around 12 minutes 25. So Link has just visited a fairy fountain and upgraded all his stuff. If you aren't familiar with Zelda, fairy fountains are a place where you receive upgrades from very powerful and large fairies. So he's at the end of upgrading all his stuff. Bye. And the background music is interactive, non-diegetic. It only happens when he is close to the fairy fountain, as you'll see in a minute. It is piano music, so the timbre is a piano timbre. It's kind of bright, kind of focused, but short in duration. And the music itself, you have the melody, da, 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 but you have all these other extra notes, and it sounds kind of cluttered in a way that reminds me of, I don't know, fairies. Fairy fountains in earlier games have the fairies kind of all just like hanging out, and it's a very different environment than Breath of the Wild. But also, this theme is in many different games. It's also in Ocarina of Time, which I played the heck out of almost 2 decades ago, and I've been hearing this theme and its heavy associations with fairy fountains for almost 2 decades. So I don't know if it sounds like fairies or if I'm just saying that because I know it's the fairy fountain music. There's also noise associated with the fairy, like speaking and water sounds, and those are all interactive but diegetic because Link can hear them. So as he walks away from the fountain, you hear a wind sound. So Link can definitely hear that. That's interactive diegetic. And then you also hear a user interface sound when he picks up the thistle, the little high-pitched beeping sound. So that's a non-diegetic sound. That is something that you hear and Link does not hear. He also has footstep sounds, which are interactive diegetic, and notably the footsteps change depending on the type of surface that he's stepping on, so he kind of alternates between this soil and grass. And as he gets further away from the fountain, the music really fades away. So by the time he's flying down to his horse, by the time he's by his horse, you really only hear the wind sound and no more fairy fountain music. So now we have a lot of terms. And after a lot of terms, I always want to go over, like, why are we learning this again? Now, instead of just saying, oh, the battle music started, you can write, the battle music is interactive and non-diegetic. It begins as the player attacks the enemy, and then you can describe its sound. So you have a much richer, more nuanced discussion of the sound that you're experiencing. And it's really a perfect jumping off point for things like structure, function, and just quickly, it can still be simple. It doesn't have to be super complicated. In the case of battle music, the game is just trying to signal that this is a serious situation and you should focus. So the next steps are to check out Chapter 7 of Game Sound. See how this discussion maps on your reading. She also speaks more explicitly to the functions of game audio, so you'll have some ideas from her regarding how to proceed. And she also talks about how game audio can create a sense of immersion for a player. So check those out, and I'll see you later.